face smoothed. On the other hand, her eyes bored into Matt like augers, and she rose to stand with her feet apart and her hands on her hips, confronting him. I will have a vessel by the end of spring at latest, as soon as my gold can be brought from Cantorin, she said in an icy voice. Matt sighed. Well, there really had been no chance he could take Aes Sedai out on a ship owned by a Shan-Chan. Not really. How do you know Tom and Julian? Doman could have told her about Tom, certainly, but Light, how could she know Julian? You ask too many questions, she said firmly, turning away. I fear I cannot use you after all. They'll put him out. The last was a peremptory command. Doman did not move from the door. Tell him, he urged her. Soon not. He must know everything, or he will put you in greater danger than you face now. Tell him. Even for a Sojin, he seemed to get away with a great deal. The Shan-Chan were great ones for property keeping its place. For everyone else keeping theirs, for that matter. Naginin must not be a quarter as tough as she looked. She looked very tough at the moment, kicking her skirts and striding back and forth, scowling at Doman, at Matt. Finally, she stopped. I gave them some small aid in Tanchico, she said. After a moment, she added, and 2 women who were with them, Elaine Trakand and Nynaeve Almira. Her eyes focused on him intently, watching to see whether he knew the names. Matt's chest felt tight. It was not a pain, but more like watching a horse he had bet on streak toward the finish line with others close behind, and the question still in doubt. What in the light had Nynaeve and Elaine been up to in Tanchico if they had needed a Shan-Chan's help and had gotten it? Tom and Julian had been close-mouthed about the details. That was beside the point anyway. Naginin wanted men who could keep her secrets and did not mind danger. She herself was in danger. Very little was dangerous to one of the blood, except for other blood, and... The Seekers are after you, he said. The way her head came up was confirmation enough, and her hand went to her side as though reaching for a sword. Doman shifted his feet and flexed his big hands, his eyes on Matt. Eyes suddenly harder than Naginin's. The thick man no longer looked funny, he looked dangerous. Abruptly, it came to Matt that he might not leave the room alive. If you need to get away from the Seekers, I can help you, he said quickly. You'll have to go where the Shan-Chan aren't in control. Anywhere they are, the Seekers can find you.
Just gotta share this out,
and it's best to go as soon as possible. You can always get more gold, if the Seekers don't take you first. Tom tells me they're getting very active about something, heating the irons and getting the rack ready. For a time, Naginin stood motionless, staring at him. At last, she exchanged a long look with Doman. Perhaps it would be well to leave as soon as possible, she breathed. Her tone firmed immediately, though. If there had been worry on her face for a moment, it vanished. The Seekers will not stop me leaving the city, I think. But they think they can follow me to something they want more than they want me. They will follow me, and until I leave the lands already held by the Friagel, they can call on soldiers to arrest me, which they will as soon as they decide I am going to lands not yet gathered. That is when I will need the skills of your friend Tom Merlin, Master Coffin. Between here and there, I must vanish from the Seeker's sight. I may not have the gold from Cantorin, but I have enough to reward your help handsomely. You can rest assured of that. Call me Matt, he said, giving her his very best smile. Even hard-faced women softened for her best smile. Well, she did not soften visibly. If anything, she frowned slightly. But one thing he did know about women was the effect his smiles had. I know how to make you vanish now. No use waiting, you know? The Seekers might decide to arrest you tomorrow. That hit home. She did not flinch. He suspected very little made her flinch, but she almost nodded. There's just one thing, Eginen. This still could blow up in his face like one of Aludra's fireworks, but he did not hesitate. Sometimes he just had to toss the dice. I don't need any gold, but I do have need of 3 Suldam who will keep their mouths shut. Do you think you could supply those? After a moment that seemed to stretch hours, she nodded, and he smiled to himself. His horse had crossed first. Doman, Tom said in a flat voice around the pipe stem, clenched between his teeth. He was lying with a thin pillow doubled up beneath his head, and he seemed to be studying the faint blue haze that hung in the air of the windowless room. The single lamp gave a fitful light. And Eginen. And she is of the blood now. Sitting on the edge of his bed, Julian peered into the charred bowl of his pipe. I do not know as I like that. Are you saying we can't trust them? Matt demanded, tamping down his tobacco with a careless thumb. He snatched his thumb out with a mild oath and stuck it in his mouth to suck the burn away. Yet again, he had the choice of the stool or standing, but for once he did not mind the stool. Dealing with Eginen had taken little enough of the afternoon, but Tom had been out of the palace until after dark, while Julian had taken even longer to appear. Neither appeared nearly as pleased with Matt's news as he expected. Tom had just sighed that he had finally gotten a good look at one of the accepted seals, but Julian glowered whenever he looked at the bundle lying in the corner of the room where he had hurled it. There was no bloody need for the man to carry on so, just because they no longer needed the Suldam dresses. I tell you, they're both scared spitless over the Seekers, Matt went on when his thumb was cooled. Maybe not exactly spitless, but frightened nonetheless. Eginen may be blood, but she never twitched an eyelid when I told her what I wanted Suldam for. She just said she knew 3 who would do what we need, and she could have them ready tomorrow. An honorable woman, Eginen, Tom mused. Every so often he paused to blow a smoke ring. Odd, true, but then she is Shonchan. I think even Nynaeve came to like her, and I know Elaine did, and she liked them, even if they were Aes Sedai, as she believed. She was very useful in Tanchico, very useful, more than merely competent. I truly would like to know how she came to be raised to the blood, but yes, I believe we can trust Eginen. And Doman. An interesting man, Doman. A smuggler, Julian muttered disparagingly. And now he belongs to her. Sojin are more than just property, you know. There are Sojin who tell blood what to do. Tom raised a shaggy eyebrow at him. Just that, but after a moment the thief-catcher shrugged. I suppose Doman is trustworthy, he said reluctantly. For a smuggler. Matt snorted. Maybe they were jealous. Well, he was to Viren, and they had to live with it. Then tomorrow night we leave. The only change in the plan is that we have 3 real Suldam and 1 of the blood to get us through the gates. And these Suldam are going to take 3 Aes Sedai out of the city, let them go and never think of raising an alarm, Julian muttered. Once, while Randall Thor was in Tyr, I saw a tossed coin land on its edge 5 times in a row. We finally walked away and left it standing there on the table. I suppose anything can happen. Either you trust them or you don't, Julian, Matt growled. The thief-catcher glared at the bundled dresses in the corner, and Matt shook his head. What did they do to help you in Tanchico, Tom? Blood and ashes, don't the 2 of you go all flat-eyed on me again. You know and they know, and I might as well. Nynaeve said not to tell anyone, Julian said, as if that really mattered. Elaine said not to. We promised. You might say we swore an oath. Tom shook his head on the pillow. Circumstances alter cases, Julian, and in any case it wasn't an oath. He blew 3 perfect smoke rings, one inside the other. They helped us acquire and dispose of a sort of male Idam, Matt. The Black Aja apparently wanted to use it on Rand. You can see why Nynaeve and Elaine wanted it kept quiet. If word spread that such a thing ever existed, The light knows what kind of tales would spring up. Who cares what stories people tell? A male Idon? Light, if the Black Raja had gotten that onto Rand's neck, or the Shonchan had. Those colors whirled through his head again, and he made himself stop thinking about Rand. Gossip isn't going to hurt anybody. No colors that time. He could avoid it as long as he did not think about. The colors swirled again, and he ground his teeth on his pipe stem. Not true, Matt. Stories have power. Leman's tales and bards' epics and rumors in the street alike. They stir passions and change the way men see the world. Today I heard a man say that Rand had sworn fealty to Elida, that he was in the White Tower. The fellow believed it, Matt. What if, say, enough Tyrans begin to believe? Tyrans dislike Aes Sedai. Correct, Julian? Some do, Julian allowed, then added as though Tom had dragged it from him. Most do. But not many of us have met Aes Sedai, not to know it. The way the law was forbidding channeling, few Aes Sedai came to Tyr, and they very seldom advertised who they were. That's beside the point, my fine Aes Sedai-loving Tyran friend, and it gives weight to my arguments in any event. Tyr holds to Rand, the nobles do at least, because they're afraid, if they do not, he'll come back. But if they believe the tower holds him, then maybe he can't come back. If they believe he's a tool of the tower, it is just one more reason for them to turn on him. Let enough Tyrans believe those two things, and he might as well have left Tyr as soon as he drew Kalandor. That is just the one rumor, and just Tyr. But it could do as much harm in Cairhien, or Ilion, or anywhere. I don't know what sort of tales might spring from a male Idam in a world with the Dragon Reborn and Ashaman, but I'm too old to want to find out. Matt understood, in a manner of speaking. A man always tried to make whoever was commanding the troops against him believe that he was doing something other than what he was, that he was going where he had no intention of going. And the enemy tried to do the same to him, if the enemy was any good at the craft. Sometimes both sides could get so confused that very strange things happened. Tragedies, sometimes. Cities burned that no one had any interest in burning, except that the burners believed what was untrue, and thousands died. Crops destroyed for the same reason, and tens of thousands died in the famine that followed. So I won't crack my teeth about this Idam for men, he said. I suppose somebody has thought to tell him. Colors flashed. Maybe he could just ignore them or grow used to them. They were gone as fast as they came, and they did not hurt. He just did not like things he could not understand, especially when they might have to do with the power in some way. The silver fox head under his shirt might protect him against the power. That protection had as many holes as his own memories. We have not exactly been in regular communication, Tom said dryly, waggling his eyebrows. I suppose Elaine and Nynaeve have found some way to let him know, if they think it important. Why should they? Julian said, bending to tug off a boot with a grunt. The thing is at the bottom of the sea. Scowling, he hurled the boot at the bundled dresses in the corner. Are you going to let us get any sleep tonight, Matt? I don't think we'll have any tomorrow night, and I like to sleep at least every other night. That night, Matt chose to sleep in Tylan's bed. Not for old time's sake. That thought made him laugh, though his laughter had too much of the sound of a whimper to be very funny. It was just that a good feather mattress and goose-down pillows were preferable to a hayloft when a man did not know when his next decent night's sleep would come. The trouble was that he could not sleep. He lay there in the dark with an arm behind his head, and the medallion's leather cord looped through itself on his wrist, ready to hand in case the golem slid through the crack under the door. But it was not the golem that kept him awake. He could not stop going over the plan in his head. It was a good plan, and simple as it could be in the circumstances. Only no battle ever went according to plan, even the best. Great captains earned their reputation not just for laying brilliant plans, but for still being able to find victory after those plans began to fall apart. So when first light illumined the windows, he was still lying there, pulling the medallion across the back of his fingers and trying to think of what was going to go wrong. Chapter 30. Cold, Fat Raindrops. The day dawned cold, with gray clouds that obscured the rising sun, and winds off the sea of storms that rattled loose panes of glass in the window casements. In stories, not the sort of day for grand rescues and escapes. It was a day for murders. Not a pleasant thought when you were hoping to live past another dawn. But the plan was simple. Now that he had a Shonshen blood to use, nothing could possibly go wrong. Matt tried very hard to convince himself of that. Lopin brought him breakfast, bread and ham and some hard yellow cheese while he dressed. Narim was folding a few last pieces of clothing that were to go to the inn, including some of the shirts Tylen had had made. They were good shirts, after all, and Narim claimed he could do something about the lace, though as usual he made it sound as if he were offering to sew a shroud. The lugubrious, gray-haired little fellow was handy with a needle, as Matt knew well. He had sewn up enough of Matt's wounds. Narim and I will take Oliver out by the refuse gate at the rear of the palace, Lopin recited with exaggerated patience, his hands clasped at his waist. Servants in a palace seldom missed meals, and his dark Tyran coat fit more tightly than ever over his round belly. For that matter, the bottom of the coat did not appear to flare as much as it once had. There is never anyone there except the guards until the refuse cart leaves in the afternoon, and they are accustomed to us taking my lord's things out that way, so they won't remark us. At the Wandering Woman, we will secure my lord's gold and the rest of my lord's garments, and Metwin, Fergin, and Gorderon will meet us with the horses. We and the Red Arms will then take young Oliver through the Dal Ira gate at mid-afternoon. I have the lottery tokens for the horses, including both pack animals, in my pocket, my lord. There is an abandoned stable on the Great North Road, about a mile north of the Circuit of Heaven, where we will wait until we see my lord. I trust I have my lord's instructions correctly. Matt swallowed the last of the cheese and dusted his hands. You think I'm making you go over it too often? He said, shrugging into his coat. A plain, dark green coat. The man wanted to be plain, all about business like today's. I want to make sure you have it by heart. Remember, if you don't see me before sunrise tomorrow, you keep moving until you find Talmanis and the band. The alarm would go up with the morning inspection of the kennels, and if he was not out of the city before that, he expected to learn whether his luck ran to stopping a headsman's axe. He had been told that he was fated to die and live again, a prophecy or near enough one, but he was pretty sure that had already happened. Of course, my lord, Lopin said blandly. It will be as my lord commands. Certainly, my lord, Narim murmured, funereal as ever. My lord commands, and we obey. Matt suspected they were lying, but 2 or 3 days waiting would not hurt them, and by that time they would have to see he was not coming. Metwin and the other 2 soldiers would convince them if need be. Those 3 might follow Matt Coffin, but they were not fool enough to stretch their necks on the chopping block if his head had already fallen. For some reason, he was not as sure of Lopin and Narim. Oliver was not as upset over leaving Rizal as Matt had feared he would be. He brought the subject up while he was helping the boy bundle his belongings to be carried over to the inn. All of Oliver's things were laid out neatly on a narrow bed in what had been the sulking room, a small sitting room, when the apartment had been Matt's. She's getting married, Matt, Oliver said patiently, as though explaining to someone who didn't see the obvious. Popping open a narrow little carved box Rizal had given him, just long enough to make sure his red hawk's feather was safe, he snapped it shut and tucked it into the leather scrip he would be carrying on his shoulder. He was as careful of the feather as he had been of the purse holding 20 gold crowns and a fistful of silver. I don't think her husband would like her to keep teaching me to read. I would not if I were her husband. Oh, Matt said. Grizel had worked quickly once she made her mind up. Her marriage to Banner General Yamada had been announced publicly yesterday and was to take place tomorrow. By custom, there was usually a wait of months between. Might be a good general, Matt did not know, but he had never stood a chance against Rizal and that marvelous bosom. Today they were looking at a vineyard in the Rhiannon Hills that the groom was buying as a wedding gift. I just thought you might want to take her with us or something. I am not a child, Matt, Over said dryly. Folding the linen cloth back around his striped turtle shell, he added that to the script. You will play snakes and foxes with me, won't you? Rizal enjoys playing, and you never have time anymore. Despite the clothes Matt was bundling up in a cloak that would go into the boy had a spare pair of some clean shirts and stockings in the script, too. And the game of snakes and foxes his dead father had made for him. You were less likely to lose what you kept on your person, and Oliver had already lost more in his 10 years than most people did in a lifetime. But he still believed you could win at snakes and foxes without breaking the rules, too. I will, Matt promised. He would if he managed to make it to the city. He was certainly breaking enough rules to deserve it. You just take care of Wind till I get there. Oliver grinned widely, and for him that was very wide indeed. The boy loved that leggy gray gelding almost as much as he did snakes and foxes.
Hey, just chilling. How you doing?
Unfortunately, Beslin was another who seemed to think you could win at snakes and foxes. Tonight, he growled, stalking up and down in front of the fireplace in Tylen's sitting room. The slender man's eyes were cold enough to take away the warmth of the blaze, and his hands were clasped behind his back from the hilt of his narrow sword. The jeweled cylinder clock on the waist guard turned 4 times for the second hour of the morning. With a few days' warning, I could have laid on something magnificent. I don't want anything magnificent, Matt told him. He did not want anything from the man, but by chance Beslin had seen Tom slipping into the stable yard of the Wandering Woman a little earlier. Tom had gone to keep Jolene amused until Egenin brought her Suldam.
Actually, I didn't really ask her for anything.
To settle her nerves and jolly her along with courtly manners. But there could have been any number of reasons for him to visit the inn. Well, maybe not that many, with it full of Sean-chan, but several, surely. Only Beslin had leaped to the reason like a duck leaping on a beetle, and he refused to be left out. It will be enough if a few of your friends fire some of the stores the Sean-chan have stockpiled on the Bay Road. After midnight, mind, as near as they can reckon it. Better an hour later than any time before. With any luck, he would be out of the city before midnight. That will draw their attention away south.
So I'd be happy with just a little extra pocket money.
Hurt them.
With anything else, just like
I said I would do it.
Get shit I need for around here.
But you can't say setting fires is exactly a grand gesture. Sitting back, Matt rested his hands on the bamboo-carved arms of the chair.
I thought it would be the end of the year.
He wanted to rest his hands anyway, but his signet ring made a metallic clicking on the gilded wood as he tapped his fingers. Beslin, you will be seen at the inn when those fires are set, won't you? The other man grimaced.
Well, I don't pay taxes.
Beslin flung up his hands. I know. I mustn't endanger Mother. I'll be seen. By midnight, I'll be as drunk as an innkeeper's husband. You can wager I'll be seen. It just isn't very heroic, Matt. I'm at war with the Sean-chan whether or not Mother is. Matt tried not to sigh. He almost succeeded. There was no way to hide the 3 Red Arms moving horses out of the stables, of course. Twice that morning, he noticed serving women handing coins to others, and both times the woman doing the handing over glared when she saw him. Even with Bannon and Harnan still solidly ensconced in the long barracks room, the palace knew that wages were being paid already. He just had to make sure no one found out how soon.
I guess I can't complain too much.
The wind picked up strength as the morning wore on, but he had Pip's
roof over my head.
Endless circles in the palace stable yard, huddling a little in his saddle and clutching his cloak close.
Got my dogs.
He rode more slowly than usual, so Pips's steel shoes made a lazy plodding sound on the paving stones. Now and then, he grimaced at the darkening clouds in the sky and shook his head. No, Matt Coffin did not like being out in this weather. Matt Coffin would be staying somewhere warm and dry until the skies cleared. Yes, he would. The Suldam walking demandingly in her own circle in the stable yard knew he was leaving soon, too. Maybe the serving women did not talk directly to the
That was a rough
Shongshan
one
women,
there.
but what one woman knew was always known to every woman inside a mile soon enough. Wildfire did not run through dry woods as fast as gossip ran through women. A tall, yellow-haired Suldam glanced in his direction and shook her head. A short-stout Suldam laughed out loud, splitting a face as dark as any of the sea folk. He was just Tylen's toy. The Suldam did not concern him, but Teslin did. For several days, until this morning, he had not seen her among the Damani being exercised. Today, the Suldam let their cloaks fly with the wind, and the
Catch a
Damani all
breather
held
real
theirs
quick.
tightly around them, except Teslin's gray cloak flapped this way and that, forgotten, and she stumbled a little where the pavement was uneven. Her eyes were wide and ordered a glance at the buxom, black-haired Suldam wearing the other end of her silver leash. When she did, she licked her lips uncertainly. A tightness settled in Matt's belly. Where had the determination gone? If she was ready to knuckle under. Everything all right? Bannon said when Matt dismounted and gave him Pips's reins. Rain had begun to fall, cold, fat drops, and the Suldam were hurrying their charges inside, laughing and running to avoid getting wet. Some of the Damani were laughing, too, a sound to chill Matt's blood. Bannon took no chances anyone might wonder why they were standing in the rain to talk. The fat man bent to lift Pips's left foreleg and study the hoof. You look much more peaked than usual. Everything is just fine, good. Matt told him. The ache in his leg and hip gnawed like a tooth, but he was barely aware of it, or of the quickening rain. Why, if Teslin was cracking now. Just remember, if you hear shouting inside the palace tonight, or anything that sounds like trouble, you and Harnan don't wait. You ride out right then and go find Oliver. He'll be... I know where the little tyke'll be. Letting go of Pips's leg and straightening, Bannon spat through one of the gaps in his teeth. Raindrops ran down his face. Harnan ain't too stupid to put his boots on alone, and I know what to do. You just take care of your piece of it, and make sure your luck is working. Come on there, boy. He added much more warmly to Pips. I got some good oats for you, and a fine hot fish stew for me. Matt knew he should eat too, but he felt as though he had swallowed a stone, and he did not leave room for food. Hobbling back up to Tylen's apartments, he threw his damp cloak over a chair, and for a time stood staring at the corner where his black-hafted spear stood propped next to his unstrung bow. He planned to come back for the Ashandarai at the last moment. The blood should all be abed by the time he moved, and the servants as well, with only the guards outside remaining awake. But he would not risk being seen with it before he had to. Even the Shongshan who called him Toy would take notice of him carrying a weapon through the halls in the middle of the night. He had meant to carry the bow, too. Good black yew was almost impossible to find outside the two rivers, and they cut it too short besides. Unstrung, a bow should be 2 hands taller than the man who would draw it. Maybe he should abandon it after all, though. He would need both hands to use the Ashandarai if it came to that, and the moment needed to drop the bow was the moment that killed him. Everything will go according to plan.
How you been doing? Just chilling?
Blood and ashes, he sounded as wool-headed as Beslan. I'm not going to have to fight my way out of the bloody palace. And almost as full-witted. Luck was a very fine thing with the dice. Depending on luck other places could get a man dead. Lying down on the bed, he propped one booted foot atop the other and lay studying the bow and the spear. With the door to the sitting room open, he could hear the cylinder clock softly chime each hour away. Light, he needed his luck tonight. The window light faded so slowly, he almost got up to see whether the sun had stopped, but eventually gray light faded to purple twilight. then to full dark. The clock chimed twice, and then the only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the rush of the wind. Workmen who had been braving the weather would be downing tools to search home. No one could attend the fires. I expected him to be there. He slept in the bed the night before. The flames in the bedroom fireplace dwindled and died. Everything was in motion now. Oliver was snug in that old stable. It still had most of its roof. The clock sounded the first full hour of the night, and after no more than a week, 4 chimes for the second. Rising from the bed, he felt his way into the pitch-dark sitting room and pulled open the hinged casement.
What I like about this Dr. Dabber's, this is the
strong wind drove raindrops
the Dr. Dabber XS
wrought iron screen, quickly soaking. The moon was behind clouds, and the city was in massive rain-shrouded darkness without even lightning to break it.
Half of
all the street lamps had apparently been extinguished.
What I put in my Dr. Dabber switch,
night would hide them when they
and I could take what you guys see, and I've already hit it like
sought them out in this weather
2 or 3 times. Versus
shivering as the wind cut through his damp coat, he shut
more than that.
Taking a seat on the edge of one of the
and the Dr. Dabber switch,
he
gave it like 1, maybe 2 hits off of it versus half of it with a little bit more hits.
He could not see it in the darkness, but here he could hear the steady tick. He remained motionless,
and they both hit pretty good.
The time of another hour made him twitch. There was nothing. In a little while, Aginin would be introducing Jolene to her Suldam. If she really had been able to find 3 who would do as she claimed. If Jolene did not panic when they first put the idam on her. Tom, Jolene, and the others from the inn would meet him just before he reached the Dal Ira. And if he did not reach it, Tom had gone ahead with carving his turnip. He was sure he could get them past the gates with his forged order. At least they had a chance if it all fell apart. If. Too many ifs to think about now. It was too late for that. Ding from the clock, like a piece of crystal tapped with a spoon. Ding. About now, Julian would be making his way to his precious Thera, and with any luck, Veslin was starting to drink hard at an inn somewhere. Drawing a deep breath, he stood in the blackness and checked his knives by feel, up his sleeves, beneath his coat, tucked into the turned-down tops of his boots, one hanging down inside the back of his collar. That done, he left the apartments. Too late for anything but beginning. The empty hallways he walked along were only dimly lit. One stand lamp in 3 or 4 carried flames in front of the mirrors, little pools of light with pale shadows between that never quite reached darkness. His boots were loud on the floor tiles. They rang on the marble stairs. It was unlikely anyone at all would be awake this late, but if someone did see him, he must not look as if he were skulking. Tucking his thumbs behind his belt, he made himself saunter. It was no worse than stealing a pie from a kitchen windowsill, though, come to think of it, the spotty memories that remained of his boyhood seemed to contain getting half-skinned for that a time or two. Stepping onto the columned walk that bordered the stable yard, he turned up his collar against the wind-driven rain flying between the fluted white columns. Bloody rain. A man could drown in it, even when he had not really been outside yet. The wall-mounted lamps had blown out, except for the pair flanking the open gates, the only glowing spots in the pouring rain. He could not make out the guards outside the gates. The Shonchan squad would be as motionless as if it were a pleasant afternoon. Very likely the Abudari, too. They did not like being shown up in any way. After a moment, he retreated to the anteroom door to avoid getting completely drenched. Nothing moved in the stable yard. Where were they? Blood and bloody ashes, where? Riders appeared in the gates, led by 2 men afoot carrying pole lanterns. He could not count them in the rain, but they were too many. Would Shonchan messengers have lantern bearers? Maybe, in this weather. Grimacing, he took another step back into the anteroom. The thin light of a single stand lamp behind him was enough to turn the night outside to a blanket of black. But he peered into it. In a few minutes, 4 heavily cloaked figures appeared, hurrying toward the door. If they were messengers, they would pass him by without a second glance. Your man Vannon is rude, Aginin announced, throwing back her hood as soon as she was beyond the fluted columns. In the darkness, her face was just a shadow, but the coldness of her voice was sufficient to tell him what he would see before she stepped into the anteroom, forcing him to move back. Her brows were drawn down sharply, and her blue eyes were icy augurs. A grim-faced Doman followed her, shaking rain from his cloak, and then a pair of Suldam, one pale and yellow-haired, the other with long brown hair. He could not see much more, since they stood with their heads down, studying the floor tiles in front of their feet. You didn't tell me she had 2 men with her, Aginin went on, peeling her gloves off. Odd how she could make that drawl sound brisk. She did not give a man room to squeeze in a word. Or that Mistress Annan was coming. Luckily, I know how to adapt. Plans always need adapting once the anchor is dry. Speaking of dry, have you been running around outside already? I trust you haven't gotten yourself noticed. What do you mean, you adapted the plan? Matt demanded, raking his hands through his hair. Light, it was wet. I had everything laid out. Why were those 2 Suldams standing so still? If he had ever seen statues of reluctance, it was that pair. Who are those others out there? The people from the inn, Aginin said impatiently. For one thing, I need a proper entourage to look right for any street patrols. Those 2 warders are muscular fellows. They make excellent lantern bearers. For another, I didn't want to risk missing them in this blow. Better that we are all together from the start. Her head turned, following his glances at the Suldam. These are Sita Zarbi and Rena Emain. I suspect they hope you'll forget those names after tonight. The pale woman flinched at the name Sita, which made the other Rena. Neither raised her head. What hold did Aginin have on them anyway? Not that it mattered. All that mattered was that they were here and ready to do what was necessary. No point standing here, Matt said. Let's get on with it. He let her changes in the plan go without further comment. After all, lying on that bed in Thailand's apartments, he had decided to risk a change or 2 himself. Chapter 31. What the Alefin Said. The Shonchan noblewoman expressed surprise and no little irritation when Matt accompanied her toward the kennels. Sita and Rena knew the way, of course, and he was supposed to be getting his cloak and whatever else he meant to carry. The 2 Suldam followed them through the poorly lit halls, cloaks hanging down their backs and eyes on the floor. Doman brought up the rear as though shepherding the pair. The braid hanging down the side of his head swayed as his eyes darted down every crossing corridor, and sometimes he felt at his waist as though expecting to find a sword or a cudgel. Except for them, the tapestry-lined hallways were silent and still. I have a small errand up there, Matt told Aginin as casually as he knew how, and smiled for her. No need to bother yourself. Won't take a minute. His very best smile seemed to make no more impression than it had yesterday in her room at the inn. If you wreck me now, she growled in a threatening tone. Just remember who planned this, he muttered, and she grunted. Right, women always seem to think they could just step in and take over, and do a better job than the man whose job it was. At least she made no further complaint. They climbed quickly to the top floor of the palace, then up the dark, narrow stairs to the sprawling attic. Only a few of the lamps were lit, not even as many as in the hallways below, and the maze of narrow corridors between the tiny wooden rooms was a mass of pale shadows. Nothing moved, and Matt breathed a little more easily. He would have breathed easier still if Rena had not sighed with obvious relief. She and Sita knew where the various domani were kenneled, and if they did not exactly hurry, they made no delay in heading deeper in the attic, perhaps because Doman still walked at their heels. It was not an image to inspire confidence. Well, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. A man made do with what he had, especially when he had no choice. Aginin gave him a last hard look and growled again, wordlessly this time, then strode off after the others, her cloak flaring behind her. He grimaced at her back. The way the woman walked, you could take her for a man if she was not wearing a dress. He did have an errand, and maybe not so small. It was not something he wanted to do, but he had tried to talk himself out of it. It was something he bloody well had to do, though. As soon as Aginin vanished around a corner after Doman and the others, he darted for the nearest room that he remembered containing one of the sea folk. Easing open the plain wooden door soundlessly, he slipped into the pitch-black interior. The sleeping woman inside snored with a rasping sound. Slowly, he felt his way forward until his knee bumped into the bed, then felt along the mound beneath the blankets more quickly, finding her head just in time to clamp his hand over her mouth as she jerked awake. I want you to answer a question. Blood and ashes. What if he had mistaken the room? What if this was not a windfinder at all, but one of the bloody Shanchan women? What would you do if I took that collar off your neck? Lifting his hand, he held his breath. I would free my sisters if it pleases the light that should happen. The sea folk accents in the darkness made him breathe again. The light be willing, we would cross the harbor somehow to where our people are held, and free as many as we were able. The unseen woman's voice remained low, but grew fiercer by the word. The light be willing, we would take back our ships and fight our way to sea. Now, if this is a trick, punish me for it and be done, or kill me for it. I was on the brink of yielding, of giving up myself, and the shame of that will burn me forever. But you have reminded me who I am, and now I will never yield. Do you hear me? Never. And if I asked you to wait for 3 hours? He asked, still crouching over her. I remember the Athan Mier judging the passage of an hour within minutes. That fellow had not been him, but the memory was his now. Passage on an Athan Mier vessel from Alarolan to Barashta, and a bright-eyed sea-folk woman who wept when she refused to follow him ashore. Who are you? She whispered. I'm called Matt Cawthon, if it makes a difference. I am Nistel Din Sakura South Star, Matt Cawthon. He heard her spit and knew what she was doing. He spat on his own palm, and their two hands found each other in the darkness. Hers was as calloused as his, her grip strong. I will wait, she said, and I will remember you. You are a great and good man. I'm just a gambler, he told her. Her hand guided his to the segmented collar around her neck, and it came open for him with a metallic snick. She drew a very long breath. He only had to put her fingers in the proper places and show her the trick once before she got it, but he made her close and open the collar 3 times before he was satisfied. If he was going to do this, he might as well make sure it was done right. 3 hours, as near as you can, he reminded her. As near as I can, she whispered. She could ruin everything, but if he could not take a chance, then who could? He was the man with luck, after all. Maybe it had not been all that much in evidence lately, but he had found Aginin just when he needed her. Matt Cawthon still had the luck. Slipping out of the room as quietly as he had entered, he closed the door, and almost choked on his tongue. He was staring at the back of a wide, gray-haired woman in a red-paneled dress. Beyond her stood Aginin, drawn up to her full height, and Teslin connected to Rena by the silver length of an idam. There was no sign of Doman or Sita, or this Edicina. He still had not seemed to know her. Aginin looked fierce as a lioness over her kill, but Teslin was wide-eyed and trembling, terrified half out of her wits, and Rena's mouth had a twist that said she might sick up any moment now. Not daring to breathe, he took a cautious step toward the gray-haired woman, stretching out his hands. If he overpowered her before she could cry out, they could hide her. Where? Sita and Rena would want to kill her. No matter what hold Aginin had on them, the woman could name them. Eginen's stern blue eyes caught his over the gray-haired Sul'dam's shoulder for a brief instant, before focusing on the other woman's face again. "No," she said sharply. "There is no time to waste with changes to my plans now. The High Lady Suroth said I could use any money I wish, dear Sulam." "Of course, my lady," the gray-haired woman replied, sounding confused. "I merely pointed out that Tessie is not really trained. I actually came up to look in on her. She is coming along very nicely now, my lady, but—" Still not breathing, Matt backed away on tiptoe. He eased back down the narrow stairs, using his hands against the walls to support as much of his weight as possible. He did not remember any creaky steps coming up, but there were chances, and then there were chances. A man took those he had to, and did not press his luck otherwise. That was the way to a long life, something he wished for very much. At the foot of the steps, he paused to suck in air until his heart stopped pounding. Until it slowed a little, anyway. It might not stop pounding till tomorrow. He was not sure he had drawn breath since seeing the gray-haired woman. Light. If Eginen thought she had the matter in hand, well and bloody good. But just the same, light. She must have nooses around the two Sul'dam's necks. Her plan? Well, she had been right about no time to waste. He ran. He ran until his hip gave a sharp twinge, and he stumbled into a turquoise inlaid table. He caught a summer tapestry to keep from falling, and the bright flowered length of silk tore free from the yellow marble cornice for half its length. The tall white porcelain vase sitting on the table toppled, shattering on the blue and red floor tiles with a crash that echoed along the hallway. After that, he hobbled, but he hobbled as fast as any man ever had. If anyone came to investigate the noise, they were not going to find Matt Coffin standing over that mess, or within 2 corridors of it. Limping the rest of the way to Tylen's apartments, he was across the sitting room and into the bedchamber before he realized that the lamps were all lit. The blaze in the bedroom fireplace had been renewed with split billets from the gilded wood basket. Tylen, her arms doubled behind her to work at her buttons, looked up at his entrance and frowned. Her dark green riding dress was wrinkled. The fire crackled and spat a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I didn't expect you back yet," he said, trying to think. Of everything he had considered going amiss tonight, Tylen returning early had never been in it. His brain seemed frozen. "Suroth learned that an army had vanished in Murandy," Tylen replied slowly, straightening. She spoke absently, giving what she said a fraction of the attention she put into studying Matt Coffin. "What army, or how any army can vanish, I don't know. But she decided her return was urgent. We left everyone behind, came as fast as one of the beasts could carry just the 2 of us and the woman who handled it, and commandeered 2 horses to ride up from the docks alone. She even went to that inn across the square where all their officers are instead of coming here. I don't think she intends to sleep tonight, or let any of them—" Letting her words trail off, Tylen glided to him across the carpets and fingered his plain green coat. "The trouble with having a pet fox," she murmured, "is that sooner or later it remembers it is a fox." Those big dark eyes peered up at him. Suddenly, she seized 2 handfuls of his hair and pulled his head down for a kiss that curled his toes in his boots. "That," she said breathlessly when she finally let him go, "is to show you how much I will miss you." Without the slightest change of expression, she slapped him so hard that silver flecks floated in front of his eyes. "And that is for trying to sneak away while I was gone." Turning her back, she pulled her mane of raven hair over one shoulder. "Undo my buttons for me, my pretty little fox. We arrived so late I decided not to wake my maids, but these fingernails make buttons all but impossible. One last night together, and tomorrow I will send you on your way." Matt rubbed his cheek. The woman could have broken a tooth for him. At least she had jarred his thoughts loose. If Suroth was at the Wandering Woman, she was not in the Tarasin Palace to see what she should not. His luck was still good. He only had to worry about the woman in front of him. The only way was forward. I'm going tonight, he said, putting his hands on Tylen's shoulders. And when I do, I'm taking a couple of Aes Sedai from the attic. Come with me. I'll send Tom and Julian to find Veslin and... Go with you, she said incredulously, moving away and turning to face him. Her proud face was scornful. Pigeon, I don't fancy becoming your pretty, and I have no intention of becoming a refugee, or of leaving Altara to whoever the Shonchan choose to replace me. I am the queen of Altara, the light help me, and I will not abandon my country now. Do you really mean to try freeing the Aes Sedai? I wish you well in it, if you must. I wish the sisters well. But it seems a good way to have your head stuck up on a spike, sweetling. It's too pretty a head to be cut off and covered with tar. He tried to take her by the shoulders again, but she stepped back with a piercing look that made his hands fall. He put every scrap of urgency he could find into his voice. Tylen, I made sure everybody knew I was leaving and anxious to be gone before you returned, so the Shonchan would know you didn't have anything to do with it. But now, I returned and surprised you, she broke in fiercely, and you tied me up and left me under the bed. When I am discovered in the morning, I will be furious with you.
I'll be right back, everyone.
She smiled, but her eyes glittered. Not that far from outrage now, whatever she said about foxes and sending him on his way. I will offer a bounty for you, and tell Tuon she can buy you when you're caught, if she still wants you. I will be the perfect high blood in my anger. They'll believe me, duckling. I've already told Suroth I intend to shave my hair. Matt grinned weakly. He certainly believed her. She really would sell him if he was caught. Women are a maze through briars in the night, the old saying went, and even they do not know the way. Tylen insisted on supervising her own binding. She seemed to take pride in it. She had to be bound with strips cut from her skirts, as if she had come on him by surprise and been overpowered. The knots had to be tight, so she could not escape however she struggled, and she did struggle against them once they were tied, thrashing about hard enough that it seemed she really was trying to get free. Maybe she was. Her mouth twisted in a snarl when she failed. Her ankles and wrists had to be tied together in the small of her back, and a leash run from her neck to one leg of the bed, so she could not wriggle her way across the floor and out into the hall. And of course, she could not be able to shout for help either. When he gently pushed one of her silk kerchiefs into her mouth and tied another to hold it in place, she smiled, but her eyes were fierce. A maze through briars in the night. I am going to miss you, he said quietly as he pushed her beneath the edge of the bed. To his surprise, he realized that he really would. Light. Hurriedly, he gathered his cloak and gloves and spear and snuffed the lamps on his way out. Women could tangle a man in that maze before he knew it. The hallways remained empty and silent, save for the sound of his own limping bootsteps, but any relief he felt vanished when he reached the anteroom off the stable yard. The single-lit stand lamp still cast a wavering light on those inevitable flowered tapestries, but Julian and his woman were not there, and neither were Eginin and the others. With the time he had taken up with Tylen, they all should have been waiting on him by now. Beyond the columned walk, the rain was sheeting down in a solid black curtain that hid everything. Could they have gone on to the stables? That Eginin seemed to change his plan whenever it suited her. Grumbling under his breath, he hitched his cloak around him and prepared to make his way to the stables through the downpour. He had had just about all he could take of women tonight. So, you are intending to leave? I cannot allow that, Toy. With an oath, he spun on his heel and found himself facing Tuon, her dark face stern behind her long, transparent veil. The narrow circlet holding the veil on her shaven head was a mass of fire drops and pearls. Yet another fortune, taken together with the wide jeweled belt that cinched her waist and the long necklace around her neck. A fine time it was to be noticing jewels, however rich. What in the light was she doing awake? Blood and ashes. If she went running off, shouting for guards to stop him. Desperately, he reached for the skinny girl, but she writhed away from his grip and sent the Ashendari flying with a sharp blow that half numbed his wrist. He expected her to flee, but instead she rained blows at him, punching with folded knuckles, chopping her hands like axe blades. He had quick hands, the quickest Tom had ever seen, according to the old gleeman, but it was all he could do to ward her off, forget about grabbing her. If he had not been trying so hard to keep her from breaking his nose, or something else maybe, she hit very hard for such a tiny thing. Except for that, he might have found the whole thing laughable. He towered over her, though he was not much above average height, yet she came at him in a concentrated fury, as though she were the taller and stronger, and expected to overwhelm him. For some reason, after a few moments, her full lips curved in a smile. And if he had not known better, he would have said those big, liquid eyes took on a glow of delight. Burn him. Thinking about how pretty a woman was at a time like this was as bad as trying to price her gems. Abruptly, she flowed back from him, using both hands to readjust the circle of gems that secured her veil. There was certainly nothing like delight on her face now. Her expression was all concentration. Placing her feet carefully, never taking her eyes from his face, she began slowly gathering her white pleated skirts in her hands, inching them up above her knees in folds. He could not understand why she was not already shouting for help, but he knew she was about to kick at him. Well, not if he had anything to say about it. He leaped for her, and everything happened at once. A stab of pain in his hip sent him to one knee. Tuan snatched her skirts almost to her own hips, and her slim, white-stockinged leg flashed out at him in a kick that passed over his head as she was suddenly hoisted into the air. He thought he must be as surprised to see Noel with his arms wrapped around the girl as she was to have those arms there, but he reacted faster than she. As she opened her mouth to shout at last, Matt scrambled to his feet and began stuffing her veil between her teeth, taking the jeweled circlet to the floor with a flip of his hand. She did not cooperate the way Tylen had, of course. A firm grip on her jaw was all that kept her from sinking her teeth into his fingers. Angry sounds came from her throat, and her eyes showed a fury they never had at the worst of her attack. She twisted in Noel's grip and flailed her legs, but the worn old man managed to shift his burden and himself to avoid every kick of her heels. Worn or not, he seemed to have no difficulty hanging on to her. "Do you often have this sort of trouble with women?" he asked mildly, around a gap-toothed smile. He was wearing his cloak, and his bundled belongings were tied over it across his back. "Always," Matt replied sourly, and grunted when a knee caught his aching hip. Managing to untie his neck scarf one-handed, he used it to secure the wadded veil in Tuan's mouth at the cost of a nipped thumb. What was he going to do with her? "I didn't know this was what you were planning," Noel said, breathing hard in spite of the way she thrashed herself about in his grip. "But as you can see, I'm leaving tonight too. I thought that in a day or two, this might be an unpleasant place for someone you gave a bed to." "A wise decision," Matt muttered. He should have thought of warning Noel. Lowering himself to his knees, he avoided Tuan's kicks, most of them anyway, long enough to catch her legs. A knife, plucked from his sleeve, started a cut in the hem of her dress, and he tore away a long strip to tie her ankles. It was a good thing he had gotten all that practice with Tylen earlier. He was not accustomed to tying women up. Tearing off a second strip of cloth from the bottom of her skirt, he picked up the circle of gems from the floor and stood with one grunt for the effort and a deeper one for a last two-legged kick that set fire to his hip. When he set his foot back on her head, Tuan stared him straight in the eye. She had stopped thrashing about uselessly, but she was not afraid. In her place, he would have been soiling himself. Julian finally arrived then, cloaked and fully accoutred, with his short sword and notched sword-breaker at his belt, and his thin bamboo staff in one hand. A slender, dark-haired woman, in the thick white robes worn by Dakavale outside, clung to his right arm. She was pretty, in a pouty way, with a rosebud mouth, but 5 or 6 years older than Matt had expected, and her large, dark eyes darted timidly. At the sight of Tuan, she squeaked and let go of Julian, as though he were a hot stove, folding herself to the floor beside the door with her head on her knees. "I had to talk Thera into running away all over again," the thief-catcher sighed, giving her a concerned look. That was all the explanation he made for his lateness, before turning his attention to Noel's burden. Pushing back the ridiculous conical red cap he wore, he scratched his head. "And what do we do with her?" he asked simply. "Leave her in the stables," Matt replied. They would if Vannin had convinced the grooms to let him and Harnan tend to any messenger's horses that came in. Until now, that had seemed like only an added precaution, not really necessary. Until now. In the hayloft. She shouldn't be found before morning, when they forked down fresh hay for the stalls. And I thought you were kidnapping her, Noel sighed, setting Tuan's bound feet back on the floor and shifting his hold on her to gripping her upper arms. Head high, the little woman disdained the struggle. Even with a gag in her mouth, scorn was clear on her face. She refused to fight, not because it was hopeless, but because she did not choose to fight. Footsteps echoed in the corridor leading to the anteroom, growing louder. It could be Eginin at last. Or the way the night seemed to be turning, it might be Death Watch guards, the Ogier sort. Hastily, Matt motioned the others toward corners, one coming through the door, and over to pick up his black spear. Julian pulled Thera to her feet and drew her to his left, where she crouched in the corner while he stood in front of her with his staff held in both hands. It appeared a frail weapon, but the thief-catcher could use it to great effect. Noel dragged Tuan to the opposite corner of the room and released one of her arms to put a hand inside his coat, where he kept his long knives. Matt planted himself in the middle of the room, with his back to the rain-soaked night, the Ashandarai upright in front of him. No matter who came into the room, he was not going to be able to dance about with his hip knotted in a fist from Tuan's kicks. But if worse came to worst, he could at least move out from people. When again through that doorway, he sat with severe relief. Two soldiers headed after her, and Dolman followed. Matt got his first look at Edicina to know who he was seeing, though he did recall her from one day when the Damani were being exercised, a slender, handsome woman in one of those plain gray dresses with black hair spilling to her waist. Despite the Idam leashing her to Sita's wrist, Edicina looked about her calmly. An Aes Sedai on a leash, perhaps, but an Aes Sedai confident that leash was coming off soon. Teslin, on the other hand, was a quivering mass of eagerness, licking her lips and staring at the door to the stable yard. Rena and Sita hurried the two Aes Sedai along behind Eginin without taking their eyes from the stable yard door. I had to soothe the Der Sulam, Eginin said, as soon as she was into the room. They are very protective of their charges. Noticing Julian and Thera, she scowled. There had not seemed any reason to tell her about Thera, not when she was willing to help Damani, but clearly she did not like the surprise of woolen robes. Her seeing Sita and Rena changes a few things, of course, she went on, but... Her words cut off as though sliced with a knife as her eyes fell on Tuan. Eginin was a pale woman, but she went paler. Tuan glared back above her gag with the stern ferocity of a headsman. Light, Eginin said hoarsely, sinking to her knees. You madman! It's death by slow torture to lay hands on the daughter of the Nine Moons? The two Suldam gasped and knelt without hesitation, not only pulling the two Aes Sedai down with them, but gripping the Idam right at the collar to force their faces to the floor. Matt grunted as though Tuan had just kicked him square in the belly. He felt as if she had. The daughter of the Nine Moons. The Aelfin had told him truth, much as he hated knowing. He would die and live again, if he had not already. He would give up half the light of the world to save the world. And he did not even want to think about what that meant. He would marry... She is my wife, he said softly. Somebody made a choking sound. He thought it was Doman. What? Eginin squeaked, her head whipping toward him so fast that her tail of hair swung around to slap her face. He would not have thought she could squeak. You cannot say that. You must not say that. Why not? He demanded. The Aelfin always gave true answers, always. She is my wife. Your bloody daughter of the Nine Moons is my wife. They stared at him, except for Julian, who took off his cap and stared into that. Doman shook his head, and Noel laughed softly. Eginin's mouth hung open. The two Suldam gaped as though at a madman, stark raving and loose. Tuan stared, but her expression was absolutely unreadable, hiding every thought behind those dark eyes. Oh, Light, what was he to do? For one thing, get a move on before... Solutia scurried into the room, and Matt groaned. Was everybody in the whole bloody palace going to walk in? Doman tried to grab her, but she eluded him, darting about. The buxom, golden-haired Sojin was not so stately as usual, wringing her hands and looking around in a hunted fashion. "Forgive me for speaking," she said in a fear-filled voice. "But what you do is foolish beyond madness." With a groan, she darted to half-crouch between the kneeling Sultan with one hand on the shoulder of each, as though seeking their protection. Her blue eyes never ceased flitting about the room. "Whatever the omens, this can still be rectified if you will only consent to draw back." "Be easy, Solutia," Matt said in a soothing voice. She was not looking at him, but he made calming gestures anyway. In none of his memories could he find a way to deal with a hysterical woman, except to hide. "No one is going to be hurt. No one. I promise you. You can be easy now." For some reason, consternation flashed across her face, but she settled to her knees and folded her hands in her lap. Suddenly all her fear vanished, and she was as regal as ever she had been. "I will obey you, so long as you do not harm my mistress. If you do, I will kill you." From Ageenan, that would have given him pause. Coming from this plump, cream-cheeked woman, short, even if she was taller than her mistress, he put it out of his mind. The Light knew women were dangerous, but he thought he could handle a lady's maid. At least she was no longer hysterical. Odd how that came and went in women. "I suppose you mean to leave them both in the hayloft?" Noel said. "No," Matt replied, looking at Tuon. She stared right back, still with no expression he could read. A boy slim little woman, when he liked women with flesh on their bones. Heir to the Shanshan throne, when noble women gave him goosebumps. A woman who wanted to buy him, and now likely wanted to put a knife in his ribs. And she would be his wife. The Aelfin always gave true answers. "We are taking them with us," he said. At last, Tuon showed expression. She smiled, as if she suddenly knew a secret. She smiled, and he shivered. Oh, Light, how he shivered. Chapter 32. A Portion of Wisdom. The Golden Wheel was a large inn just off the Abharan market, with a long, beam-ceilinged common room crowded with small square tables. Even at midday, no more than one table in 5 had anyone sitting at it, though, usually an outland merchant, facing a woman in sober colors with her hair worn on top of her head or gathered up at the nape of her neck. The women were merchants, too, or bankers. In Farmatting, banking and trade were forbidden to men. All the foreigners in the common room were male, since the women among them had taken up the women's room. The smells of fish and mutton cooking in the kitchens filled the air, and occasionally a shout from one of the tables summoned one of the serving men who waited in a line at the back of the room. Otherwise, the merchants and bankers kept their voices low. The sound of the rain outside was louder. "Are you certain?" Rand asked, taking the creased drawings back from a lantern-jawed serving man he had drawn off to one side of the room. "I think it's him," the fellow said uncertainly, wiping his hands on a long apron embroidered with a yellow wagon wheel. "It looks like him. He should be back soon." His eyes darted beyond Rand, and he sighed. "You better buy a drink or go. Miss Galger doesn't like us talking when we should be working, and she wouldn't like me talking about her patrons any time." Rand glanced over his shoulder. A lean woman with a tall ivory comb stuck in the dark bun at the back of her head was standing in the yellow-painted arch that led to the women's room. The way she looked over the common room, half queen surveying her domain, half farmer surveying her fields, and either way displeased with the sparsity of trade she saw, named her the innkeeper. When her gaze fell on Rand, and the lantern-jawed fellow, she frowned. "Mulled wine," Rand said, handing the man some coins, coppers for the wine, and a silver mark for his information, uncertain as it was. More than a week had passed since Rand had killed Rochide and Kisman had gotten away, and in all those days this was the first time he had gotten more than a shrug or a shake of the head when he showed the drawings. There were a dozen empty tables right at hand, but he wanted to be in the corner at the front of the room, where he could see who came in without being seen himself. And as he edged his way between the tables, snatches of conversation caught his ear. A tall, pale woman in dark green silk shook her head at a stocky man in a tight-fitting black Tyrant coat. An iron-gray bun made her look a little like Cadswain from the side. He appeared to be made of stone blocks, but his dark, square face was worried. "You can put your mind at ease about Andor, Master Admira," she said soothingly. "Believe me, the Andorans will shout and shake swords at one another, but they'll never let it come to actual fighting. It is in your best interests to stay with the present route for your goods. Kyrian would tax you a fifth more than farmatting. Think of the added expense." The tyrant grimaced as if he were thinking of it, or wondering whether his best interests really coincided with hers. "I hear the body did be all black and swollen," a lean, white-bearded Illianer in a dark blue coat said at another table. "I hear the councils did order it burned." He raised his eyebrows significantly and tapped the side of a pointed nose that gave him the appearance of a weasel. "If there was plague in the city, Master Azarios, the councils would have announced it," the slim woman sitting across from him said calmly. With two elaborate ivory combs in her rolled hair, she was pretty in a fox-faced way, and cool as an Aes Sedai, though with faint lines at the corners of her brown eyes. "I really protest against moving any of your trade to Lugar. Normandy is most unsettled. The nobles will never stand for Roedran building an army, and there are Aes Sedai involved, as I'm sure you have heard. The light alone knows what they will do." The Illianer shrugged uncomfortably. These days, no one was very certain what Aes Sedai would do, if they ever had been. A Kandori, with gray streaks in his forked beard and a large pearl in his left ear, was leaning toward a stout woman in dark gray silk, who wore her black hair in a tight roll along the top of her head. "I hear the Dragon Reborn has been crowned King of Ilion, Mr. Schimmel." A frown put more wrinkles in his forehead. "Given the White Tower's proclamation, I am considering sending my spring wagons to travel along the Aranin to Tyr. The river road may be a harder route, but Ilion is not such a market for furs that I want to take too many risks." The stout woman smiled, a very thin smile for such a round face. "I'm told the man has hardly been seen in Ilion since he took the crown, Master Posavina. In any case, the tower will deal with him, if it hasn't already. And this morning I received word that the Stone of Tyr is under siege. That is hardly a situation where you will find much market for furs now, is it? No. Tyr is not a place to avoid risks." The wrinkles in Master Posavina's forehead deepened. Reaching a small table in the corner, Rand tossed his cloak over the back of the chair and sat with his back to the wall, turning up his collar. The lantern-jawed fellow brought a steaming pewter cup of spiced wine, murmured a hurried thanks for the silver, and scurried off at a shout from another table. Two large fireplaces on either side of the room took the chill off the air, but if anyone noticed that Rand kept his gloves on, no one glanced at him twice. He pretended to stare into the wine cup between his hands on the table, while keeping an eye on the door to the street. Most of what he had overheard did not interest him greatly. He had heard as much before, and sometimes knew more than the people he eavesdropped on. Elaine agreed with the pale woman, for example, and she had to know Andor better than any farmatting merchant. The stone under siege was new, though. Still, he need not trouble himself with it yet. The stone had never fallen, except to him, and he knew Alana was somewhere in Tyr. He had felt her leap from just north of Farmatting to somewhere much farther north, then a day later to somewhere far to the south and east. She was distant enough that he could not say whether she was in Haddon Merk or the city of Tyr itself, yet he was confident she was one place or the other, with 4 other sisters he could trust. If Marana and Raphella could get what he wanted from the sea folk, They could from the Tyrans, too. Rafaela was Tyran, and that should help. No, the world could get along without him a little longer. It had to. A tall man swathed in a long, damp cloak, with the hood hiding his face, came in from the street, and Rand's eyes followed him to the stairs at the back of the room. Starting up, the fellow threw back his cowl, revealing a fringe of gray hair and a pale, pinched face. He could not be the one the serving man meant. No one with eyes would confuse him with Peril Torval. Rand went back to studying the surface of his wine, his thoughts turning sour. Min and Nynaeve had refused to spend one more hour tramping the streets, as Min had put it, and he suspected Olivia was only going through the motions of showing the drawings, when she did even that. They were all three out of the city for the day in the hills, he judged from what the bond told him of Min. She felt very excited about something. The three of them believed killing had fled after failing to kill Rand, and the other renegades had either gone with him or never come at all. They had all been trying to talk him for days now. At least Lan had not given up. Why can't the women be right? Lews Theron whispered fiercely in his head. This city is worse than any prison. There is no source here. Why would they stay? Why would any sane man stay? We could ride out beyond the barrier just for a day, a few hours. Why, just for a few hours? The voice laughed uncontrollably, wildly. Oh, Light, why do I have a madman in my head? Why? Why? Angrily, Rand forced Lews Theron to a muted hum, like a bite-me buzzing nearby. He had thought about accompanying the women on their ride, just to feel the source again, though only Min had shown much enthusiasm. Nynaeve and Olivia would not admit why they wanted to ride out when the morning sky had promised the rain that was pouring down outside now. This was not the first time they had gone. To feel the source, he suspected. To drink in the one power again, if only for a short time. Well, he could endure not being able to channel. He could endure the absence of the source. He could. He had to. So he could kill the men who had tried to kill him. That is not the reason, Lews Theron shouted, forcing past Rand's efforts to shut him up. You are afraid. If the sickness takes you while you are trying to use the access Tirangrial, it could kill you, or worse. It could kill us all, he moaned. Wine slopped over Rand's wrist, soaking his coat sleeve, and he loosened his grip on the wine cup. The thing had not been in true Rand to begin with, and he did not think he had bent it enough to be noticed. He was not afraid. He refused to let fear touch him. Light, he had to die eventually. He had accepted that. They tried to kill me, and I want them dead for it, he thought. If it takes a little time, well, maybe the sickness will pass by then. Burn you, I have to live until the last battle. In his head, Lews Theron laughed more wildly than before. Another tall man swaggered in, through the door to the stable yard, almost at the foot of the stairs in the back of the room. Shaking rain from his cloak, he tossed back his hood and strode to the doorway of the women's room. With his sneering mouth and sharp nose, and a gaze that swept contemptuously over the people at the tables, he did look something like Torval, but with 20 years more wear on his face and 30 pounds of fat on his frame. Peering through the yellow arch, he called out in a high, prissy voice that was thick with the accents of Ilion. Mistress Golger, I do believe in the morning. Early. So I do expect no charges for tomorrow, mind. Torval was a Tarabonner. Gathering his cloak, Rand left his wine cup on the table and did not look back. The noon sky was gray and cold, and if the rain had slackened, it was not by much, and driven by blustery lake winds, it was enough to have driven almost everyone from the streets. He held the cloak around him one-handed, as much to shelter the drawings in his coat pocket as to keep the rest of him dry, and used the other hand to hold his hood against the gusts. The wind-blown raindrops hit his face like flecks of ice. A lone sedan chair passed him, the bearers' hair hanging sodden down their backs, and their boots splashing in puddles on the paving stones. A few people trudged along the streets, wrapped up in their cloaks. There were hours of daylight left, such as it was, but he walked by an inn called the Heart of the Plain without going in, and then by the Three Ladies of Moredo. He told himself it was the rain. This was no weather to be making his way from inn to inn. He knew he was lying, though. A short, stout woman coming down the street, bundled in a dark cloak, suddenly veered toward him. When she stopped in front of him and raised her head, he saw it was Baron. "So, you are here after all," she said. Raindrops fell on her upturned face, but she did not seem to notice. "Your innkeeper thought you intended to walk up to the Abharan, but she was not sure. I'm afraid Mistress Keene doesn't pay much attention to the comings and goings of men. And here I am with my shoes soaked through and my stockings. I used to like walking in the rain when I was a girl, but it seems to have lost its charm somewhere along the way." "Did Cadswain send you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice from sounding hopeful. He had kept his room at the council's head after Alana left, and Cadswain could find him. He could hardly make her interested if she had to hunt for him inn by inn, especially since she had shown no evidence that she would hunt. "Oh, no, she would never do that." Baron sounded surprised at the thought. "I just thought you might want to hear the news. Cadswain is out riding with the girls." She frowned thoughtfully, tilting her head. "Though I suppose I shouldn't call Olivia a girl. An intriguing woman, much too old to become a novice, unfortunately. Oh, yes, very unfortunate. She drinks in whatever she's taught. I believe she may know almost every way there is to destroy something with the power, but she knows almost nothing else." He drew her to the side of the street, where the deep overhanging eaves of a single-story stone house gave a little shelter from the rain, if not from the wind to any great extent.
Alright, everyone. I'm going to call it into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support.